All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Elena G Levine. I am president of Quantum Success Solutions, and I am so excited today to be with you to present this panel with this really amazing all-star team that we assembled just for you about careers in science policy. We want to talk to you a little bit today about how you can view a career and a career path and the profession and the jobs in science policy. We're going to spend some time talking about these issues. And like I said, we brought together in particular a really amazing team of astronomers, all PhDs who have then migrated their careers into the wonderful world of science policy. So before we get really knee deep into everything, I want you to know I am monitoring the chat the entire time. We want to hear your comments. We want your questions. We're going to be taking questions from the audience the entire time. And of course, this is being recorded, so you will have a chance to go back and review it many, many, many times to hear the sound of our voices over and over and over again. I think it will be great. So today, let me introduce our panel to get started. I would like to first of all welcome Bethany R. Johns, Dr. Bethany R. Johns, who is with the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. Hi, Bethany, welcome. And can you give us a quick definition of what science policy is, please?
Okay, I think that science policy is using science to inform part of the political process. And it's also vice versa. The political process can also dictate how science is performed in the United States. So it's a cycle.
The cycle. So science helps policy, policy helps science.
Correct.
Awesome. We'll go into more detail about that. I'd like to also welcome Ashley Wilkins, who's a member of the professional staff for the U.S. House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Welcome, Ashley. And Ashley, tell us what your definition of science policy is, please.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And so for me, as Bethany said, I think there's sort of two sides to the science policy definition. But for me, a lot of it is about the funding strategy for the conduct of science, thinking about priorities in science in the short and medium and long term, and how we get science done sort of in a bigger picture. That's where I would put it.
Good point. And I'm glad you talked about that. It also sounds like it's a similar type of cycle too. Excuse me. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to welcome Jennifer Weston, who works for Federated IT, which is a company that is a contractor for the US federal government. In particular, Jennifer works as an astronomer at the US Naval Observatory, where, of course, our vice president just moved into her new home, I think in the last 24 hours. Jennifer, welcome. And what do you think? What's the definition of science policy that you cling to or you think is best for people to understand?
I tend to think of science policy as a whole arena that's just generally surrounding and supporting and using and promoting all of these publicly and even privately funded science.
Excellent. I think these three definitions, thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Bethany. I think these three definitions give us a good start for today. Just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, you can throw them in the chat. I will be monitoring that the whole way. We already got a great question. I'm going to answer that question, Perry, your question in just a moment, or at least start to answer it in a moment. Just to remind audiences that this webinar, as you know, is being recorded, and you will be able to access it and all the other webinars that we've done over the last year, including a number of really exciting career panel discussions with other astronomers and other leaders in different fields. You can take a look at the videos all on the AAS website, aas.org/careers/workshops, or on their YouTube channel, careers/career.-workshops, or on their YouTube channel, which is AAS, AA Astronomy, AA Astronomy, love that. And also want to remind you that we are coming up on the summer meeting. Who is excited? Who's psyched for the summer meeting? Throw it in the chat if you're going to be attending or if you're thinking about attending. I'll be there. Ladies, any of you going to be attending? I think this is going to be a monumental, amazing event. It's a virtual event this year, so you have the chance to go, to present iPosters, to network, to interact, to get a job, lots of opportunities. So I see Michael and Michael are both interested. Michael times 2 are both interested in the AAS summer meeting. And Diane, if you don't mind just throwing that in the chat for people, how they can register for the summer meeting, that would be great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to show you all this slide right now. You're welcome to take a screenshot. This is all of our panelists, their social media, their Twitter handle, and their LinkedIn. You are welcome to connect with any of us and follow us on Twitter. And now I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes while I ask our panelists about their origin story. I'll take this slide down after the origin story and we continue to converse. And then I'll bring this back at the end of our session so that you'll be able to get their contact information to continue the conversation. All right, so let's start with our origin story. Bethany, can you give me a little bit of idea, about 3 minutes long, your origin story? What you do now, how you got there, how you pivoted, how you migrated from being in research astronomy to being in public policy for an association, please.
Yeah, so please check out my LinkedIn page. It shows, I was just joking, I'm the one on the panel that's got a decade or so under my belt of all the different places I've gone, and you can see the diversity of places that I've been, just having the background in astronomy and physics. So it's very exciting. So the way it started for me is I'm one of those weird kids that a junior in high school, I got into a project in my calculus class where I just immediately fell in love with nuclear and particle physics. It was just like, this is how the world works. I don't need to know anything about chemistry or biology. I just want to do physics. And I had made a decision at that point. Nobody in my family had ever done a science degree or ever pursued a higher education degree. But junior in high school, I'm like, PhD in physics, that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm one of those hard-headed people that of course would do that. So I had a laser-like focus for the rest of high school and the rest of my undergraduate career, physics, 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 math, 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 doing everything I could to get in the #1 program I wanted to get into. And I got in, and then even though I had all of the wonderful professors in undergrad that advised on like what was going to be like in grad school, you never really know until you get there. And so after even about a year, it became extremely frustrating, this sort of rite of passage mentality that was at my institution or just in graduate school in general. And I just wasn't going to stand for it. So I got involved in graduate student government at Clemson University. And I represented the physics and astronomy department for about 3 to 4 years while I was in graduate school. And from that experience, I realized I really enjoyed and I was really good at being a lobbyist and getting what we wanted, because we had just some basic issues like healthcare and representation and family leave and housing, like just some basic things that we needed to really get figured out if we were going to be a university that people wanted to go to grad school for. So I worked with the dean of the graduate school. I worked with our president. We did, some statewide lobbying. But one of the things I'm actually the most proud of is leading and developing the professional enrichment grant program at Clemson University for graduate students. The goal was to give as much money to as many graduate students as possible to help them understand anything they needed to know about their career trajectory, wherever that career trajectory wanted to go. So for example, if you disagreed with your advisor and wanted to go into policy and you were seeking funds to learn more about that, then we would give you those funds. So through all of that experience, I realized pretty early on I needed to have this discussion with my advisor about career trajectory. And I lucked out and had a really good advisor. Not everybody does. He supported it. And then the #1 thing that really, I think, gave me a leg up, what I was told after the process of actually getting to DC, was Clemson University has a certificate program for policy studies that I signed up for. So we'll go into all of the advice that I have for people once we get moving. But that certificate really, or that program, is what got me the Bacall Fellowship. And then I came to DC even before I officially got my PhD, because the decadal survey had just came out. And so I was in the thick of it, but I could do that and was comfortable with that because I already had a significant background in policy from my work in South Carolina. So I could hit the ground running. And I think I did as many options as I could to volunteer and get involved and know those things. So that's one of the big pieces of advice.
Thank you.
And I've been sticking around in DC. I've been a registered lobbyist. I'm not registered now, but if you have questions about that, we can go into that as well.
Bethany, can you just give us a quick definition of what a lobbyist is and what a lobbyist does for people who are unfamiliar?
So a lobbyist is an official defined term where you have to register through the federal government, where you confirm that what you're doing is meeting and trying to impact policy changes for an institution or an individual. So you are hired by somebody and paid by somebody to represent that opinion.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And just to clarify for the audience, thank you so much, Bethany. A great view of your career progression. Just so the audience knows, when we talk about lobbyists, that's the word that's used in the US. There are other types of positions like that in other federal governments and other probably state governments or provincial governments around the world and other nations. We have already gotten questions about working as somebody who is not based in the US or not somebody who is not from the US, how they can get involved. We will answer that. We've gotten 2 questions plus a pre-webinar question from people who want to know, can I be in science policy without a PhD? Hashtag spoiler alert, yes, you can. And we are going to talk about that too. So hang tight. We're going to answer your questions. Keep throwing them into the chat. Keep throwing them into the Q&A. Ashley, I'd love to hear your origin story of becoming a STEM policy superhero. Tell us a little bit about how you migrated and what you do now for the US federal government, please.
Sure, yes. So my current job is I'm on the professional staff for the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. And I specifically work for our Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee. And my work essentially encompasses, I work to support what the committee and what Congress does in conducting oversight and just general policy making for all of, say, civil side space. So that means civil as opposed to national security defense side. So that includes, it's NASA, obviously is the big agency here in the US, but then it also includes commercial space and the regulations and policy in that arena. So that's what I do now. I've been there I just hit my 2-year anniversary for being there. Before that, I was a Bacall Fellow, just like Bethany. So I was, that's at the AAAS, and happy, I think we're probably going to dig a little bit more into what the Bacall Fellow is later. So I can talk more about that. I became a Bacall Fellow straight out of grad school. As a grad, I went to University of Maryland for my PhD, and my research was in exoplanet atmospheres. I was using Hubble data to study transiting hot Jupiters. And I also spent, like Bethany, I was doing a lot of other things that weren't just research as a grad student that really, I think, prepared me and helped sort of set me on this path. I worked a lot in my department in a bunch of different areas, but I spent a lot of time in particular on a diversity and inclusion initiative that we were working on that was partnering with some area HBCUs. But then I did also get involved in graduate student government. It's something we can dig more into, but there actually are a lot of opportunities because not many graduate students get involved at a given university. So it's a lot easier, the sort of bar for getting really high up and engaged in the workings of the university. It's actually pretty low for graduate students, which is exciting. And the nice thing about being at the University of Maryland, I was right outside of DC. And so I did take, head on the metro and come downtown to DC and see the occasional hearing in person. And I was already really interested in policy that came in part, so as an undergrad, I went to Cornell and I double majored in physics and English. I also did a couple of summers as a JPL intern, and I got to work on a mission that was in development or right before it was launching and then right after it launched. And that, for me, even then, I really realized that I enjoyed the sort of bigger picture thinking about strategy for science and how we plan missions and how we think about long-term mission development. That was part of why I had chosen Maryland as a grad school, was because of its relationship with Goddard. So I did some research at Goddard as part of my PhD. So I even knew from that point that I probably wanted to be on some kind of path at that point, I think I didn't quite realize that that was science policy, but I think that is part of science policy, is how federal agencies sort of prioritize and develop big scientific and mission programs. And that's really, I would say, where I sort of pointed in that direction and just evolved from there.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm so glad that you brought up this idea of gaining the experience that is relevant and applicable to careers in science policy from what you have in your universe at the moment, your graduate school, your undergraduate experience, even in your community. You do not have to work for the US House or the Indian federal government to get a job in the Indian federal government. You can work in your school and make change happen, be a change agent within the school. One of my favorite science policy type career stories is the AAS CEO, Dr. Kevin Marvel. He was working in graduate school. I believe his story was that he helped, if I recall correctly, sorry, Kevin, if I got it wrong, that he helped graduate students at NMSU, New Mexico State University, as a graduate student. He helped them get health insurance and across the campus, and that gave him that valuable leadership and communication and project management and delegation and collaboration, and the idea of coalescing teams together for a specific product or a policy change in this case. And it helped him to actually get his first job at the AAAS, which I believe was in public policy. And now he runs the AAAS. It's really quite amazing, the resources that you have at your disposal right now. You can leverage those. So I'm glad that you both mentioned that. And Jennifer, tell us a little bit about your origin story to superhero in science policy. Where are you now? What do you do now? How did you migrate there, please?
Sure, happy to tell you. Happy to be here. So my current position is that of a federal contractor. I work for a company that has contracts with a government agency, in this case, the US Naval Observatory, to send people to work for them. Most of their services are in IT, but they also look for stray astronomers since they were working for the observatory. And so even though my title right now is astronomer, my job is more of a mix of communications, project management, and some analysis thrown in there. And what I basically do on a day-to-day basis is I'm talking to and working with other Navy and DoD and other government groups and projects to find out what kind of data, scientific data they need, whether we can provide it for them. And most of the people I talk to don't have these strong scientific or astronomy backgrounds. So part of my position is to really showcase the value of the science and the catalogs that are produced by the observatory and this federally funded science. I made my break towards this area after my PhD. I did a postdoc at Green Bank Observatory, which was about half research and half support work. And that really reinforced the idea I had in grad school, which was that research wasn't really my favorite part of being an astronomer. I loved going and talking to people about science, but I liked doing research too, but it wasn't the only thing I loved. So when I was looking to branch out in my career path, I was really looking at science policy and science communication. I grew up in a very politically active and aware family, so that helped as well. And that led me to the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. And what happened was actually one of my mentors from graduate school who knew I was looking to move in a different path and who I had talked to about my interests, and I had mentioned my time volunteering on political campaigns, actually pointed out the fellowship to me because he knew that it was an area I was really interested in. And thanks to him, I applied and ended up getting one of the positions in 2017. So I spent 2 years working at the National Science Foundation in the Computer Science Directorate, which is not my background. And I'll talk about this later, but the AAAS fellowships really encourage cross-pollination of what your background is and where you work. And just learned a lot about the ins and outs of government science funding, how science policy is shaped, and just the whole governmental arena. And I really enjoyed working in and with and the government, I guess, and seeing how change could be affected from that direction. And that led me to continuing to work in this government area as a contractor.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. We have gotten another question about being able to go into science policy without a PhD. And since it's now, I think I've got the count right, about 5 or 6 questions. It's somewhere between 5 and 6 and 72 million. So I'm pretty close to my estimation here. Since we've gotten so many questions about pursuing a career in science policy without a PhD, with just a bachelor's, with just a master's, can you talk to us a little bit about how to do this? Like, where are the opportunities? Where are the jobs? How would I prepare for a career like this? And we can look at it from applying for the positions and where they're actually located, or what skills I should be thinking about acquiring as an undergraduate physics major, as a master's in astronomy or physics or some other science topic, scientific field. Who'd like to take this one, please?
If I could, I'd love to start. So the best place to start is just go to indeed.com, search government relations, and find the exact qualifications and all the job descriptions that you can find. You're all data kind of people, right? So collect data on what you will need in order to succeed. So that's part of my list of recommendations always, is that if you're interested in these types of positions, the main keywords to search are government relations, federal relations, state relations, political relations, always relations or something in there. And then go to USA jobs as well for those who are US citizens. Unfortunately, the majority of jobs through the government, USA jobs, have some restrictions, but you can clearly see very well outlined the list of qualifications. There are job sites for the Senate and the House to also look at resumes. None of the jobs on the House or the Senate require PhDs. So you're in good company there. And then, of course, anything local, definitely get involved locally. Again, if you have the opportunity to participate in your university, jump in there. So the fellowships, that's a very specific and tailored approach or solution to a problem that we had decades ago. And what we needed was expertise in policymaking. And so the fellowships were designed to get PhD scientists into the policy arena. So if you know you're going to get your PhD, then the fellowships are an opportunity for you. And normally, I know of no AAAS, AAAS, Science and Technology Fellowship that does not require a PhD. Even at the American Institute of Physics, where we ran two fellowship programs, there was always this question of, do we require it or not? And it was always required. But that is a tiny niche place of getting into the policy world. If you're interested in policy, just start searching for jobs and see what you come up with. LinkedIn, another great resource.
Well, that's Bethany, I'm so glad that you brought that up about looking at the jobs. And that is just a general job search task that we can all do whenever we're looking to move forward in our career, no matter what we want to do. Look at the jobs that are being advertised. And maybe you're not looking to make a career change yet, or you're finishing up your master's degree, and maybe you want to go do something else before you shift back into research or whatever it is. By looking at what the job advertisements say for the responsibilities, you will get an idea of what you should be focusing on right now, what types of skills you should be honing, what types of opportunities you should be experiencing. So those are really useful. And you also, and Bethany, in talking about this, it also brought to mind the idea that most organizations, so universities, companies, associations, nonprofits, government agencies, government labs, have a team of people that are working on science policy related topics, usually under the banner of government relations. So for example, my alma mater at the University of Arizona, we have an entire government relations division that has people who work for the federal, who work for the state, the local government, people who interact with congressional delegations, people who interact with our international governmental partners as well. And so to know that this division exists within any type of organization that you may be affiliated with right now, you could potentially reach out to that team or an individual on that team or a few and say, I'd like to learn more about what this career is like. I'm here at the University of Maryland. I see you work for the Federal Relations Division or Department of the University of Maryland. Can I meet with you for 15 minutes and have that informational interview? So there are, again, resources you can grab onto right now.
Another unsung hero at your university is your research university sponsored program office. They are the group that keeps everyone on track on everything that the government requires with regards to research and science policy. So they do a tremendous amount of work. And if you're not necessarily going to sort of jump into the fun tweets about Gates and other things, like maybe you still want to be sort of in the science bubble, that research sponsored program office that deals more with the regulations and directing a lot of energy towards the science agencies is a really good place to also look for positions. And nobody's got a PhD there either.
And just to clarify, because we just got this great question from Shannon about having a PhD in a discipline other than astronomy. Of course, we're sponsored today by the American Astronomical Society. Our team today we're filled to the brim with astronomers who've shifted into science policy. But this topic is absolutely not exclusive to astronomy PhDs or astronomy or space policy topics or jobs. So I want you to know that whatever your degree happens to be in, particularly in STEM, whatever STEM area, this is something that you can pursue. Now, I want to ask Jennifer, please.
I will point out that the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship is open to any STEM PhD or those with a master's in engineering. So it is not an astronomy specific policy fellowship. Yes. It is a broad swath. So if you have a PhD in or in another STEM field or a master's in engineering, that policy route, that fellowship route is still open to you.
Yeah. And we just also got another question, another statement. I know this person. Hi, Christine. Christine announced that she's a STEM educator. I'm glad you're here. And for all of you who are educators, there's another fellowship called who organizes it? I forgot. The Einstein Fellowships, where a teacher gets a chance. It's in the United States, but I wonder if there's analogs to other places around the world. A teacher can be embedded in a federal agency for about a year to learn about science policy. Oh, it's the Department of Energy. Thank you, Bethany. Yeah, so the Department of Energy Einstein Fellowship. I will give you a list of all the fellowships, I promise. But before we get into the fellowships, Jennifer, Ashley, did you have anything else you wanted to say about careers without the PhD for the bachelor's and the master's?
Yes, I wanted to just add a couple of things. It somewhat depends on what your interests are. So, I mean, in Washington in particular, a path for anyone, regardless of what your background is either getting involved in campaigns locally. That is a path that people take, and or starting as an intern anywhere on the Hill. And it's unfortunate that it's very siloed. So every office does things a little bit differently. Generally, it has gotten better in terms of pay for interns, but it is still not well paid compared to, say, an REU internship or something, but you can do those either during the school year or in the summertime if you're still a student, or even as a sort of post-bac time. They're usually essentially by semester or by summer. Like the science committee does interns, and we have folks from a very wide range of backgrounds. You don't have to have, you can still be a student. You don't have to have any particular level of education. And then if you are interested in going into government, like working at agencies, I'll also mention the yet another fellowship, the Presidential Management Fellowship, which you can get with a PhD. You just have to have some kind of advanced degree, in any field. So people with law degrees, but also if you get a master's degree and just anything beyond, you don't have to have a PhD. That is one path. That one is specifically designed. It's very competitive. It's very selective, but if you get it, it's a pretty sweet deal because it's designed to put people, it is meant to set up folks for essentially government management positions. So you get placed in an agency, and it's a high likelihood that you will be able to get a job within the government once you're a PMF. So that's another. There's also the STIPI, which is the Science and Technology Policy Institute. It's something that not a lot of people know about. It's what's called an FFRDC, a federally funded research and development center, and they are contracted through mostly government agencies for internal studies of sort of a wide range of things, but they sometimes do kind of cost benefit analysis or industry analyses to inform scientific and R&D strategies. They have a fellowship as well that's not you don't have to have a PhD. I think you can actually do it with just a master's, but it's specifically, it's not as public facing because most of the reports that they do are internal. They're for for internal government use. So folks don't know about it as much.
Thank you, Ashley. And Diane, you are amazing. Diane and Bethany, I think, are furiously adding all these different fellowships into the chat. What we're going to do, we're actually going to take all these together. We'll send you an email after the session so that you have all of these different public policy and fellowships and everything, all the information that you have relevant. You mentioned STIPI. I'm glad you did, Ashley. That's the Science and Technology Policy Institute. It's run by the Institutes of Defense Analyses. I think it's one, not multiple, just one. I actually had a contract with them. I actually had a gig with them for a couple of years, many years ago. And my job was, as a science writer, was to help develop, and admittedly, I was mostly the writer, but help develop a evaluation sciences tool that was going to be used by another government agency for budget decisions and also programmatic evaluation to decide whether or not this program and project was actually meeting and perhaps exceeding expectations. So we're getting so many great questions. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I want to ask the panel. We're talking about science policy. Can you give me an example of your proudest accomplishment recently in the job that you have right now, or a task that you actually did? Because I want to make it clear to the audience what you're actually doing. So can you talk about either one of those or meld them together into a wonderful black hole merger? Who can do that? Who'd like to start?
You want me to start again? I can do that. So my proudest moment right now in this moment for working with the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities is working with land grant universities and HBCUs, and I love that. Right now, as Ashley knows, we're in the quagmire of everything that's happening with NSF and policy world. The Endless Frontiers Act is one big piece of legislation that's coming out. Then the House Science Committee that Ashley works for just released a similar bill. And where I'm at now is like, we get first pass at that. Like, I get to see it before anyone else. And that's fun. I like that. But my most proudest moment. So you may have heard of this small little robot that now roves Mars called Perseverance. And Perseverance is powered by plutonium-238. That's the isotope that creates the battery that runs the space missions. And I will never, I think I I peaked in my science policy career as the AAAS John Pakal Fellow, because that was the issue that I worked on. And it was during the recession, and it was coalescing a whole team of people, complete with PR strategies, news, tweets, Hill visits, just the works. And we got actual money, like real money, not sort of the funny money that kind of shows up in unfunded mandates from Congress. We got real money to refund or restart production of plutonium-238. So if it wasn't for that real money, there would not be a rover on Mars right now.
Amazing.
And also about the time we got the legislation through, the really wonderful book by Andy Weir came out, and plus the movie. So like, this is very futuristic. I like to say, you know, I helped save Mark Watney because he used plutonium-238 to stay alive on the planet. It's totally fictional, but still fun. So arguing and trying to get production of nuclear material in the United States is really hard. So I am extremely proud of that moment, and we are making it now. There's just now been a relationship, an MOU started between the Department of Energy and NASA to study nuclear materials and how they can be used for space and their impact on people and their life in space. And it's because of plutonium-238 that all these things are happening. And I'm so proud of that moment.
That's amazing. Bethany, first of all, congratulations, mazel's. I mean, you helped save Matt Damon and you helped us explore our solar system. I mean, check, check. I mean,
Yeah.
Hashtag goals right there.
That's right. I'm done.
You're done. But I can't wait to see what you're going to do next, because I know there's more on your plate for the future. So this is exciting.
Yeah.
How awesome. Cecile says that you're radioactive. I totally agree with that. Radioactive, absolutely.
Good. I like it. Yeah.
I would point to sort of, this is a little bit more generalized, but the thing that I think that can be, just for me personally, the coolest part of my job, or the times when I'm the most just like dorkily excited, is that part of my job, it's only part of it, is to help draft speeches that members will be making, or to draft so we work and we prepare hearings, which is when we have witnesses who might be scientists or might be government officials that the members are going to ask questions of. And so one of my jobs is to draft potential questions, and there are lots of people involved in that process and approval of that process. But it's the coolest thing when you hear your own words, like that a member, and it's a member of Congress, they get to decide what they're going to say, and sometimes they have their own work prepared, or they are interested in other things. But when they do use your words for a question or in their statement on the House floor, it is the coolest thing, and it's really fun, and it really feels like, oh, maybe I'm contributing something very direct and material to the work. That's only part of, but in terms of, that's some of the things that I do fairly regularly, and it's, it takes more, I'm hearing it more often now that I've been there for 2 years. It certainly wasn't as much, it's slowly, but it's really fun to say like, oh, I wrote that sentence.
But Ashley, I'm thrilled that you actually mentioned this, because let's take this apart and let's look at how actually incredibly invaluable this one action of writing a speech or writing talking points is to the local ecosystem of science and policy, but also to the greater good for society. Because when you're doing this, you're researching the particular topic, and maybe it has to do with plutonium-232, or maybe it has to do with some other topic, funding something, or funding vaccines, or whatever it is, or funding research to develop communication programs to encourage people to take the COVID vaccines. Could be anything like that. So you're engaged in the research, you're leveraging your scientific skills because you know how to do the research, you know where the resources are, you know how to talk to the knowledge experts to find out what you need, you know how to draw information and data out of them to actually prepare it. Then you're actually writing it. So you're using your communication skills to take this very high level science and translate it in a way that the representative, the congressional representative, or whoever it is that you're serving in that immediate moment, is going to be able to understand, excuse me, and respond to it in an effective way. And then when they speak it, when they write it, if you're writing, for example, an op-ed in their name, a ghost writing piece, you are able to share with the larger community why this issue is important, why people should invest in it, why they should call their congressional rep to support it. I'm seeing an entire pipeline of essentially ideation to commercialization.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of it, and sometimes there are ways that can feel discouraging, but I think it's also really empowering. Like it's exciting to see that happen. Where, you know, I might have read an entire 100-page National Academy study, and I have to figure out how to take all of that information and come up with, say, a question that can be asked concisely and succinctly, but actually get a reasonable, a helpful, useful answer, and a question that looks like, to a member of Congress who may not have very long to look at this list of questions, that they can look at it very quickly and say, oh, I want to ask this question. I mean, when I first started, I tended to write questions that were way too long because I wanted to give all the context or get very specific, but you also don't want to ask questions that are too broad. And so having to distill all of that into something that can be useful is tricky, but it's sort of fun as well.
I can imagine, like for me as a science writer and a speaker, I like the idea of the teasing aspect of it, like trying to tease out the valuable information or the nut of the kernel of the conversation, so that people will respond in a positive way that's
Right.
hopefully will support what I'm trying to promote. One of my first volunteer activities that I took on after I had my first full-time job, so we're talking about 1,000 years ago, was in Tucson, Arizona, where I live, and I ended up volunteering for the local science and engineering science fair, obviously, and I invited our local congressional representative, the former U.S. Representative Jim Colby, to come and address the students, and I wrote the speech. And by write the speech, I mean I wrote 3 paragraphs and he read 2 sentences. But it was quite exciting to see.
But 2 of those 2 sentences were your sentences. And
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
welcome,
it's a really cool feeling,
ladies and gentlemen. Jennifer, tell us what your proudest accomplishment is, and maybe give us an insight into a task that you've been involved in, please.
Sure. I think for proudest thing, I'm actually going to go back to my fellowship as well. And like I mentioned, I was working with a computer science director at NSF. And if you know anything about computer science, it's one of the worst STEM fields for gender equality. And so one of the things that I did, every so often, NSF programs will meet up with groups of the people who they are funding and who they are working with and who want to be funded them by. And so one of those meetings, myself and another woman co-organized a series of several discussions talking about issues that women were facing in computer science that made it more difficult for them to continue or pursue this path, and just a bunch of the issues surrounding that. And we had some frankly amazing one-on-one and group discussions with these women, and also men who were also in the periphery, but focusing on the women's stories. And after those discussions, we compiled their stories into a document, also did a bunch of background research looking at, one of the things we found was it's hard to find resources, even though there are resources out there. And so we compiled a bunch of the stories, a bunch of the resources into one document. This took months to write up. And also linking different groups that were supporting women and other underrepresented groups in STEM, and compiled this 20-page report, which is now publicly available to anyone in that community who is interested in finding resources and learning more about women in computer science and the issues that are faced there.
Wow. See, and it wasn't exactly a government, quote unquote, a government related project. It was something that is going to make a difference in science and, more importantly, in society. I just love that example. Thank you, Jennifer. So we're getting in more questions, and I just want to answer this, or start with one particular question. And to this person, I don't know how to pronounce your name, so if you can write in the chat for me how to pronounce your name, I'd like to recognize you. It's somebody with the last name of R-A-U. And this person asks, what are the most significant soft skills and hard skills that are helpful in this career path? And I was going to ask that too. So you read my mind. Talk about being a psychic physicist here. What are, ladies, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the top soft skills that have enabled your success in your career and also have enabled your success in getting the jobs that you want in science policy? Who'd like to take that one first?
I'm going to answer Ashley for her. Writing, right? Yeah. So Ashley, you start.
Yeah, I mean, writing is definitely up there. I mean, the thing is that soft skills, I feel like the discussion around soft skills for anything, it's the same. The skills are needed for anything that you're going to do. And whether you're going to be a professor, you will be more successful if you spend more time, if you develop skills in writing and in speaking and in, you're going to have to prioritize depending on exactly what you want to do. But all of these things about communication, about networking is important. All of these sorts of soft skills will apply regardless of what, it's the same soft skills essentially in every career. I would say networking and in-person communication is maybe a bit more important, in particular in politics or in policy. But really any of the same soft skills that you should be hopefully trying to develop as you can as a student for a career in policy, in science or in research. It's sort of a lot of the same ideas.
I would imagine. I mean, I'm a career consultant, as many of you know. I speak about STEM career issues, development pathways, all the different ecosystems in which you can be successful no matter what you study. And of course, networking is the number one skill. Networking communications, no matter what panel I'm on, no matter what workshop I'm in conducting, no matter who I'm speaking to, it's all about communications and networking. I just want to clarify this for the audience. I define networking as creating and building a win-win alliance with another party where you're both providing value. You're aiming to help that person solve a problem. But Ashley, even that you brought up networking, can you give us an example of you actually networking that led to either a job or it led to an opportunity or just led to a new idea or inspiration, please?
I'm gonna have to take a minute to think of a specific example, but the interesting thing about, I would say general about policy is that you never know what networking situation, what existing relationship you have will be valuable. And usually it's often not in the way that you think it will be. It's that in a couple of years, some specific topic is going to come up and you're going to remember that you know someone or someone else will remember that they knew you and you were an expert on X or Y. So I think networking just to network, lots of people do it. You see a lot in DC. I don't think it can have value, but I think it is this trying to find sort of meaningful networking and just keeping people in mind, remembering who you have and haven't met and who you have in your now virtual Rolodex is important, because you just never know, especially if you stay in the sort of space and science policy world. It's a relatively small world. The same people have been around, are going to be around, and you're going to come up against them in other contexts. And so it can be really helpful to maintain those relationships and have somebody and know that you can call on somebody in a few years.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Bethany, thank you for adding that book. So there's a wonderful book, and there's actually a Facebook group dedicated to this. It's called Marketing for Scientists. And Bethany, I knew you highly recommend it. I would be totally remiss and out of my mind if I didn't say I've also written a book called Networking for Nerds, which goes into detail about all the networking that we're talking about. So that I think might also be helpful to you. Sorry, I had to do it. Don't sue me. All right, Jennifer, how about you? What's a soft skill? Oh yeah.
I agree with all the skills that people have been bringing up: communication, networking. What I would also point out is learning how to put yourself forward, thinking about what you have done and your accomplishments and how they are transferable to other fields. You've written a research paper and published with a group of people. Well, you've led a team to a successful completion of this project. You've worked with a variety of international group of collaborators. You've written talks for a wide variety of audiences.
Yes.
Thinking about how to, people might not know why they want an astronomer or be it astronomy PhD or a physics bachelor's or what have you. They might not know how that applies to the area that you're looking to work in, and you need to think of those answers for them, because
Absolutely.
you're all smart, hardworking people who know how to learn how to do new things, and those in themselves are skills that are in demand. Just learning how to do a new thing and be quick on your feet and pivot directions if something isn't working out and trying a new approach. And those are all skills that we learn getting a degree, whatever that degree may be, in physics or astronomy.
It's exactly what I say all the time, which is that you getting a degree in astronomy, physics, or honestly any STEM field, and quite frankly, we could even extend it to literally any subjects. I know some of you in the audience today are studying law and philosophy of science and other areas, humanities. Really, there's so many skills that you gain studying those fields that are applicable to these topics. And the way to actually pull that information from your brain, to do the data download from your brain, there's two ways to get that vocabulary, to get that information. Honestly, one is from networking, from talking to people like our team today and saying, could you talk to us? Can you tell me a little bit, what are some of the skills? How do you call them? What's the vocabulary that you use? Or I did this as a graduate student, or I'm doing this in my undergraduate final project. Is this valuable? How is it valuable? So having those conversations, you learn the vocabulary, you learn the language, you learn the culture. The other aspect of the data download is really just beginning to keep track of all the different projects and experiences that you've had in your entire career, going back to when you were a student. The different class projects, your TA-ship, your RA-ship, everything, anything that literally gave you experience that allowed you to solve a problem. And you're trying to extract from that, what were those soft skills? What were those business skills and management and project management skills? What were the technical skills and so forth? And we've done webinars on this topic about how to market your value, how to pull that information and download that data from your brain. And if you go onto that website, I'll show it to you again in a bit. And Diane, if you can throw it in the chat as well, that AAS, all the webinars that we've done, you can actually take a look at that. And I'm happy to answer those questions. We're getting so many more questions. I want to be able to answer a few of them. So I'm going to ask for rapid fire answers. Joshua wants to know if you can pursue a career in science policy after getting back, let's see, after pursuing it later on. So
Yes.
not doing it immediately after you graduate, the second you finish your degree or your postdoc, can you shift later on? How do you think about that?
Yes, you should do that. And I think that if you want to, it was much easier to shift from being in science or in research into policy at any stage of your career than to shift back. So if you are undecided about whether or not you want to stay on the research track or go into policy, stay in research as long as you can, because it's a lot harder to switch. You can switch back. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is just a lot harder to stay up to date and to really be able to go back in. And no one cares your age in policy.
So one of my pieces of advice as well is, I'm going to try to be rapid fire. If you're Zen, if what makes you happy is to continue to be in the research bubble, that is great, because you can still plug in many ways. So example, with all of the science agencies, you can actually be on an advisory committee that says, I think you should start grants on this project or this idea, or you can be a part of the decadal survey process. Sign up for any of the things that are happening at the national academies. I recommend you go to Federal Register, is it .gov or .com? Google it. That's the place where you find all the announcements that are coming out of the agencies. So if you want to continue the research track, there are ways you can plug in that will actually enhance your career. as a researcher and be involved in science policy. I also wanted to shout out, if you're a professor in that realm, and you have like a decade or more of experience, there's a program called the Jefferson Fellow through the National Academies. Nick Sunsef, who was a board member of the AAAS, actually had done that track. I've known others from agriculture as well that have gone that way. And they've actually had international careers after their Jefferson Fellow. So there are many opportunities if you are of past the postdoc, early career or mid-career.
So we got a couple of questions. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer, please.
And the AAAS fellowship is for any career stage. Some of my fellows were tenured professors or had been working in industry for 30 years before they joined the fellowship.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Okay,
Yep.
Good to know. I'm going to ask you one final question before we conclude for the day, before we have our team give their final statements. This is sort of it's a combination of multiple questions. We have a question from Zach, a question from Carl, and a question from Alexandra, who all want to know, or Alexandra, who want to know about politics being in science policy, or how mistrust of science, depending on the nature of the administration, how has that changed career paths or influenced career paths, or is your career fickle in the sense, or is it precarious in the sense that when a new administration comes in, you could lose your job or your opportunity? Lots of things to talk about there. We could spend 3 hours and not even scratch the surface, but who wants to take a 15-second run at answering that one?
So I got the job at the Agronomy, Crop and Soil Science Society specifically because I wanted to do the big ticket things. Like I had become known as the NASA girl. I'm not sure if I like that title, but that was what people called me. And so I was like, I'm going to pivot out of space and do big stuff. And so I chose to work in that area because of climate change, everything that was happening in the genetic space, and AI and all that stuff is tied into that. So the politics was certainly a part of that. And I found that fun. I really enjoyed working with Republican offices and trying to find new ways to talk about the importance of science, and even the Democratic offices, because like you have this image in your mind that most of the conservative politicians may not be on the boat with climate change, but the liberal politicians may not be on the boat with returns of genetically engineering. So it was like a fascinating world.
Yeah.
So I can answer the practical question of, so for my job in particular, so committee staff, the reason I got my job was because when the Democrats, so I work for, so committee staff is divided between the majority party staff and the minority party staff. The Democrats are in the majority in the House, and the majority party gets 2/3 of the staff budget for committee staff and across lots of things. So that means that if you lose the majority, you lose half of your budget, which means you lose half the staff. So if the House were to flip back, so because the House flipped to Democrats, they were able to expand their staff on the House Science Committee Democratic staff. So there was an opening that I had the opportunity to go for. If the House if the House flipped back, that would at least call into question, because they would have to cut their budget in half. And then I'll just add that I think that science is political, but I think there are a lot of subtleties that Bethany was alluding to, but that is a talk that we can talk about for hours, really. There are lots of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I know you all have so many other questions. I'm sorry we don't have an infinite amount of time. We're not approaching a singularity here. So unfortunately, we don't have the ability to answer every question. You are welcome to contact any of us. Here's all of our contact information. I'm going to ask each member of our amazing panel, can you give us a 22.7 second response of what is your final piece of advice for getting involved in science policy, pursuing a career in science policy? Bethany, why don't we start with you, please?
Number one thing, I encourage you to make sure you do your soul searching and understand what is going to make you happy. I think that is the most important thing. For me, what made me happy was the complete switch. But you may not want that complete switch. You may be like totally in love with banging particles together, and that's okay too. So think about where your zen lies, what makes you happy, and then fill in your resume in all the blank spaces that you want policy experience or you want to move forward in a policy type career. That may be a fellowship, that may just be being involved locally at your university. It's a spectrum, it's big and broad.
I love it. Thank you, Bethany. Thank you for that radioactive answer. Ashley, what do you have to say to our audience?
My one last piece of advice is to remember, if you're a PhD student, as much as we talked about all the other things that we did that weren't research, the value, if you're getting the PhD, the value of your PhD is the PhD part. It is the research. And many of us are in science policy because we are generalists by nature in many ways, but DC is full of generalists and people who can think both generally, but have true depth and expertise are incredibly valuable. And so do not neglect the expertise and the experience that you get from either a PhD or from other areas. Be aware of where you can get expertise and what your true expertise is, because that's very valuable.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley, for that supernova of answers. And Jennifer, what's your final statement, please?
I think my final statement has been said before, but just remember to keep talking to people, tell people what you're interested in, listen to what they're interested in, and reach out to people. People are usually really happy to talk about their life story and what they've been doing, making sure that you are constantly keeping people in mind and keeping in touch with them. I got my job, literally, someone reached out to me on LinkedIn is how I got my current position. So making sure that you are letting people know what your interests are and asking them about theirs is completely invaluable.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much. This, I think, was a wonderful session, and I really appreciate you elucidating for us these amazing career opportunities in science policy. Please connect with us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please let us know how we can help you in your career adventures. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you, Diane, and thank you to the AAS. Here's to your unicorn career. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.